What if something so ordinary was hiding a deeply unsettling secret? And when you finally discover the truth, will it be too late to look away? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's story is A Jug of Syrup by Ambrose Bierce, a classic horror story reimagined and retold for the modern age.
Let's start our story. He died on a Tuesday, the 16th of July, 1863, and 2 days later they put him in the ground. Every soul in Hillbrook came, every man, every woman, every child old enough to understand what it meant to lose someone who had always simply been there. The local paper called it largely attended. That was one way to put it. At the graveside, they opened the coffin. One by one, they filed past, slow, quiet, each face tilting downward for a final look at the man they had known their entire lives. Then the lid came down. Then the earth came up, and before the eyes of every witness gathered on that hill, Silas Deemer was gone. Some eyes glistened, most did not, but all of them saw it. Every ritual observed, every tradition honored, no detail overlooked, no step skipped. There was no loophole, no technicality, nothing that could have given him any reason to come back. And yet, Hillbrook was a small village, the kind that doesn't change, the kind where 31 years can pass and a man can become so woven into the fabric of the place that people stop noticing him the way they stop noticing the church steeple or the old mill wheel. He's just there. He has always been there. Silas ran a shop. Not a remarkable shop, not a famous one, just a general store, the kind that sells everything and specializes in nothing. He was honest, quietly, consistently, unremarkably honest. No one ever questioned that. No one had reason to. If anyone found fault with Silas Deemer, it was only this: the man lived for his counter. Not in the way people say it and don't mean it, in the way that is entirely, almost disturbingly, literal. For over 25 years, every single day, Sundays alone excepted, he had been inside that store. Rain, heat, cold, it didn't matter. His health was perfect, and so his excuses were non-existent. Once, a court summons arrived, an important case. His testimony was needed at the county seat. He didn't go. The lawyer who suggested the court reprimand him was met with something the judge called surprise, judicial surprise, the kind that ends conversations. The motion disappeared before it could draw another breath, and both sides quietly agreed on what Silas would have said, a compromise that, notably, did more damage to the people who'd called him than if he'd never been summoned at all. The village had long since expected nothing different from him. Silas Deemer was not a man, not exactly. He was a constant, a fixed point, the only thing in Hillbrook that did not shift, did not wander, did not change with the seasons or the years. People felt, not consciously, but somewhere deep and unspoken, that Silas ever left that store, something would break, something in the order of things, something that couldn't be easily repaired. They were right to feel that way, because Silas did leave, and something broke. His wife and daughters slept upstairs. Silas never did. For as long as anyone could remember, he had slept on a narrow cot tucked behind the counter, close enough to hear the door, close enough to be ready. That was where they found him one night, by pure chance, dying. Quietly, without drama, without a word. He was conscious, they believed. His eyes were open, but he could not speak. He passed just before dawn, just before the hour he would have unlatched the shutters. Those who knew him best said it later in hushed tones, half joking and half not. If the end had come any later, if it had stretched past opening time, it would have been a mercy to spare him the indignity. The village wit, a man who had notably once attended college, gave Silas Deemer a nickname after the funeral. Old Ibidem, the same, always the same. And in the first newspaper issue following the death, the same wit wrote a small notice, carefully worded so as not to offend, suggesting that Silas Deemer had simply taken a day off. People smiled. It was a kind joke, a fond one. But it was wrong. It was not a day off. Because within a month, less than a month, Silas Deemer made it quietly, unmistakably clear that he did not have the time to be dead. Alvin Creed was a man of standing. Hillbrook's banker, its finest house, a carriage, a reputation built carefully over many years and maintained with equal care. He had traveled, to Boston certainly, and possibly to New York, though he never confirmed the latter with any confidence, which the town found either admirably humble or admirably honest, depending on who you asked. Either way, it spoke well of him. On a warm summer evening, somewhere near 10 o'clock, Creed came home. The moon was out, full and white. The gravel path to his front door glowed pale in the darkness, each stone sharp and clear as bone. He came through the garden gate, walked the path, climbed the stone steps, and paused at the door. His key, the lock, a small, ordinary moment. He pushed the door open. His wife was there, crossing the hall from the parlor toward the library, unhurried, pleasant. She smiled, stepped back to hold the door wider. He didn't move. He stood at the threshold, looking down, at his feet, at the empty step. Why, pause. What the devil, he said slowly, has become of that jug? His wife's smile cooled slightly at the edges. What jug, Alvin? The maple syrup. His voice was steady, but something behind it was not. I carried it from the store, set it right here at my feet to get the key out, and now it's... He stopped. He looked at his hands. He looked at the step again. Nothing.
Alvin, her voice was quiet, firm. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask, it stops. Please don't swear. He barely heard her. The jug was gone. He looked at the step again, then at his hand, then at the step. The moonlight was clear and cold and left no room for shadows to hide anything. The step was empty. It had always been empty. There was nothing there to find. Are you quite sure, Alvin? My dear, the words came out slower now, careful, the way a man speaks when he is trying to hold something together. Do you suppose a man doesn't know when he is carrying a jug? She said nothing. I bought that syrup at Deemer's on my way past. Deemer himself drew it from the cask. He lent me the jug. I set it down right here to get my key, and I... He stopped. The sentence just stopped. Something crossed his face. Not confusion, not anger. Something else entirely. He moved past her without a word, through the door, down the hall, into the parlor. He found the armchair and he sat. No, he fell into it, and his hands gripped the armrests, and his whole body was shaking, not shivering, shaking, the way a man shakes when the ground beneath him has shifted and he hasn't caught up to it yet. His wife followed. She stood over him, watching. For heaven's sake, she said, what is the matter with you? He didn't answer. He stared at the wall, or through it. The clock on the mantel ticked. Once, twice, slow and measured, as if even time had decided to be gentle with him tonight. The silence stretched, and then he spoke. Jane,
His voice was thick, wrong. I have gone mad. That is the only explanation. That is what has happened to me. He swallowed. You must have seen it coming. The signs must have been there. I don't know why you didn't tell me, but I understand. I understand it now because I have seen it myself. She didn't move. I thought I was walking past Deemer's store. The words came faster now, tumbling. It was open. The lights were on. I could see everything, the counter, the shelves, all of it, exactly as it always was. And Deemer was there, standing at his desk, behind the counter, just as he always stood. A breath. I went in. Another breath, shorter. I remembered you'd asked for maple syrup, so I went in and I bought it, 2 quarts. He drew it himself from the cask and he handed it to me. We spoke. He was quieter than usual, more serious, I thought, but we spoke. I heard his voice, Jane. I looked at his face. His grip tightened on the armrests. And then I came home, and the jug was gone. And I remembered. The clock ticked. Silas Deemer has been in the ground for 3 weeks. Silence. I saw him, Jane, as clearly as I see you right now, as real as this chair, as real as this room. His voice dropped to almost nothing. And I know he is dead. I watched them put him there. And yet I saw him. I spoke to him. And I bought maple syrup from a dead man. He looked up at her. His eyes were wide and lost. I'm as mad as a man can be. And you knew. You must have known. And you said nothing.
She looked at her husband. She said nothing now either, but her mind had begun, slowly, carefully, to work. Alvin. Her voice was steady, deliberate, the voice of a woman who has decided in real time what shape this moment will take. You have shown no signs of madness, none. This was an illusion, exhaustion, nothing more. You pushed yourself too hard today. The board meeting alone would have been enough, and I could see when you left this morning that you weren't well. I knew something like this might happen. He didn't point out that the warning would have been more useful before the something happened. He was too tired. And somewhere beneath the trembling, a kind of cold clarity was beginning to settle in. He straightened in the chair. The phenomenon was likely subjective, he said, and even he could hear how strange the words sounded in his own mouth. The careful, borrowed language of science dropped into a room still thick with fear. A hallucination, even if one were to accept the possibility of spiritual apparition, even full materialization, the jug is another matter entirely. He paused. A clay jug, heavy, coarse, 1/2 gallon of maple syrup inside. You cannot hallucinate weight. You cannot hallucinate the feel of a handle in your palm for an entire walk home. He shook his head slowly. That part makes no sense. That part I cannot explain away. And then the door burst open. Small feet, a white nightgown. His daughter, hair loose, eyes bright with the particular indignation of a child who has been left unkissed at bedtime. She crossed the room at a run and threw her arms around his neck. "Papa," accusatory, warm, "you forgot. You came through the gate and you didn't come up to say goodnight, and we were waiting." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Eddie wants to know, can he have the little jug when it's empty?" The room went very still. Creed did not move, did not speak. Something passed through him. Not a shudder exactly, something deeper, something that started in the chest and had nowhere to go. The child had not been in the room. The child had not heard a single word. She knew about the jug. The store had closed the day Silas died. The administrator had moved quickly, sold the stock, cleared the shelves, handed the keys to another merchant who had purchased everything at once and taken it elsewhere. The rooms above sat empty. The widow and her daughters had left Hillbrook entirely. There was nothing in that building now, nothing that belonged to anyone living. But by the following evening, half the town was standing across the street from it anyway. Word had traveled the way words always travel in small places, without anyone quite meaning to send it, without any single moment you could point to and say, "There, that is where it began." It had simply moved, house to house, fence to fence, until by nightfall everyone in Hillbrook knew that Alvin Creed had bought maple syrup from a dead man. Most claimed not to believe it. They came anyway. The crowd pressed along the opposite sidewalk, men with their hands in their pockets, women with their arms folded, children darting between legs for a better view. The building stood dark and silent across the street, exactly as it had stood every night since July, shuttered, still, giving nothing away. The bolder ones threw stones at the front wall, carefully, deliberately missing the windows, because disbelief, it turned out, had its limits. A few crossed the street entirely, rattled the door, struck matches and held the small flames up to the glass, peering into the darkness beyond. They saw nothing, heard nothing. Some in the crowd shouted, groaned theatrically. One man, to general laughter, challenged the ghost to a foot race. The building said nothing. It didn't need to.
Then, nothing. The minutes dissolved into one another. The crowd shifted, thinned. Some slipped away quietly, like smoke pulled into dark air. Those who remained didn't speak. They waited, though not one of them could have said what exactly they were waiting for. Then someone saw it. A glow, faint, yellow, somewhere deep inside the store. Not lamplight, not fire. Something that had no name, something that had no business being there at all. The stones stopped mid-throw. Voices dropped to nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The light grew, slow, patient, inevitable, pressing into the dark corners 1 inch at a time until the whole interior lay bare. Every shelf, every barrel, every shadow surrendered. And there, behind the counter, motionless at his desk, Silas Deemer, standing exactly where he always stood. The crowd fractured. The edges went first. The ones who had stayed out of stubbornness, out of the particular human refusal to be the first to run, they ran now. Some sprinted without looking back. Others walked quickly, stealing glances over their shoulders, as though turning away too long might invite something to follow. The sidewalk emptied in waves, until only a handful remained. A score of them, mostly men, rooted to the ground, staring at the figure behind the glass. Nobody moved. Nobody suggested moving. They simply watched. Silas Deemer did not look up. He was reading. A ledger, his book of accounts, the same book perhaps he had always kept. His attention was complete, total, as if the street outside did not exist, as if the pressed faces and the open mouths and the wide, terrified eyes were nothing, less than nothing. Then, almost without deciding to, 3 men stepped off the curb. They crossed the street together. Something unspoken moved between them. The heaviest one reached the door, shoulder forward, ready to force it open. It opened, on its own. No handle turning, no creak of resistance, just open, as if the store had been expecting them. They crossed the threshold, and immediately something was wrong.
The crowd outside watched through the glass as the three men began moving like men who could not see, hands stretched forward, stumbling, veering hard into the counter, into barrels, into each other, colliding with things any sighted person would have stepped around without thought. They turned in circles, they backed into walls. Their voices came through muffled and strange, exclamations first, then curses. They were trying to get out. They could not find the way. And through all of it, Silas Deemer stood at his desk, reading. Not a glance, not a pause, not the faintest tremor of acknowledgement. Then the crowd moved, all at once. No signal, no word, something beneath decision, beneath reason, beneath the thin surface of the rational mind had simply shifted. Men, women, children, even the dogs, a sudden surge, complete and without hesitation, toward the entrance, bodies pressing together in the doorway, elbowing, pushing, a wall of human will forcing itself through a single point. Then something changed. The pushing slowed. The crowd rearranged itself. A line formed, almost orderly, almost solemn, and they began to move forward, one step at a time, filing in, patient now, quiet. What had begun as spectacle had become something else entirely. They were no longer watching. They were inside. The audience had taken the stage. One man did not cross the street. Alvin Creed, the banker, stood alone on the far sidewalk, still, watching. The last witness the night had left standing. From where he was, he could see everything. The store blazed with that cold yellow light, every shelf, every face, every collision. The crowd inside moved like trapped animals, and in a way, that is exactly what they were. They groped through what should have been a familiar room, arms swinging at nothing, hands grabbing at whatever they could reach, clothing, hair, skin. They struck blindly, they fell, they were stepped on, and then they rose and stepped on others in turn. Voices tangled together in the dark, screaming, cursing, calling out names no decent person speaks aloud. But to Alvin Creed, to the one man watching from outside, it was all perfectly visible. Every detail, every brutality. A lit stage, and he the only audience. He watched the last person in the line disappear through the door. Then the light went out. Complete, instantaneous, as if it had never been. The store was dark. The street was dark. And Alvin Creed stood in the silence, alone now in a way that felt permanent. He looked at the storefront for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away. Morning came the way it always does, indifferent, pale, unhurried. By the time the sun had fully risen, a new crowd had gathered in front of Deemer's, curious, quieter than the night before. Some were the same people who had fled in the dark, returned now, armored by daylight, by coffee, by the comfortable logic of morning. Others were simply passerbys, on their way to work, drawn by the cluster of faces. The door stood open. The store was empty. No, not entirely. On the floor, on the walls, draped across the furniture, shreds of clothing, tangles of hair, evidence of something the light was now too honest to hide. The people of Hillbrook had, somehow, found their way out. They were home now. In bed, they would tell anyone who asked. In bed all night, sound asleep. Behind the counter, on the dusty desk, the sales book lay open. Someone looked. The entries were in Silas Deemer's handwriting, careful and precise, the way they had always been. The last entry was dated July 16th, the last day of his life. Every line after that, blank. The pages that followed were clean and untouched. There was no record of a sale to Alvin Creed. There was no record of anything. Time passed, as it tends to. The anger faded. The fear was swallowed quietly by routine. And when enough distance had grown between Hillbrook and that night, people allowed themselves to think more clearly about what had actually happened, about what Silas Deemer had actually done. He had opened his store. He had stood at his desk. He had made a single, quiet, honest sale to a long-time customer. That was all. Nothing threatening, nothing malicious, nothing really that any reasonable person could object to, if they were willing to set aside the question of how a dead man could make a sale at all, which, admittedly, required some setting aside. In the end, even the local historian, a careful, measured man not given to sentiment, found himself agreeing with the general feeling that had slowly settled over the town. Silas Deemer, deceased, could probably have been allowed to reopen without the mob. It would have been the neighborly thing to do.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.